and maybe singing. It was hard to say in the din. Without stirring, he could count 10 flutes, not to mention twice as many tin whistles, and a skinny Carianan in a ragged coat was blowing something that looked part flute and part horn, with some odd bits tossed in. And there were countless drums, most of them pots being banged with spoons. In short, the camp was bedlam and a ball rolled into one. He recognized it, mainly from those memories he could still assign to other men if he concentrated hard enough. A celebration of still being alive. One more time they had walked under the Dark One's nose and survived to tell the tale. One more dance along the razor's edge finished. Almost dead yesterday, maybe dead tomorrow, but alive, gloriously alive today.
Hey, so how you
Like
doing?
What good was
Just let me share this out real quick so I will do a dab.
He shook his head as Derrid, Estion, and a heavy-set red-haired Aielman he did not know staggered by, holding each other up. Barely audible through the clamor, Derrid and Estion were trying to teach the taller man between them the words to Dance with Jack of the Shadows. We'll sing all night and drink all day, and on the girls we'll spend our pay. And when it's gone, then we'll away to dance with Jack of the Shadows. The sun-dark fellow showed no interest in learning, of course. He would not unless they convinced him it was a proper battle hymn. But he listened, and he was not the only one.
Okay.
By the time the three passed out of the crowd, they had acquired a tale of 20
Excuse me.
waving dented
Let's do a dab and then
tarred leather mugs,
smoke a joint.
A tune at the top of their lungs.
Oh yeah, sorry.
There are some delight in ale and wine, and some in girls with ankles fine. But my delight, yes, always mine, is to dance with Jack of the Shadows. Matt wished he had never taught any of them the song. The teaching had just kept his mind occupied while Derrid stopped him from bleeding to death. That ointment stung as bad as the gashes themselves had, and Derrid would never make a seamstress jealous with his delicate handling of needle and thread. Only the song had spread from that first dozen like fire in dry grass. Tyrants and Carianan, horse and foot, had all been singing it when they returned at dawn. Returned. Right back to the hill valley where they had started. Below the ruin of the log tower, and no chance for him to get away. He had head, and Talmanas and Elysion nearly came to blows over who was to provide. Not everyone had become the best. All he needed now was to come asking questions about where he had been and why.
All right, safety meeting.
Had him about Taviran and duty.
Let's do one more and then
until his head spun.
We'll get to the joint.
She was with Rand now, but she
Let's
would
enjoy
this
some of my freak show.
Up to the hilltop in the tangle of shadows among broken trees. That Carianan fellow who made the looking glasses for Rand was up there with his apprentices poking about. The Aiel had been full of what happened there. It was definitely past time for him to be gone. The Foxhead medallion protected him from women channeling, but he had heard enough from Rand to know a man's channeling was different. He had no interest in finding out the thing would shield him from Samael and his ilk. Grimacing at darts of pain, he crafted spear to lever himself to his feet. Around him, the celebration went on. If he drifted down to the picket lines now, he was not looking forward to saddling Pips. The hero should not sit without drinking. Startled, he jerked around, grunting at the stab of his wounds, to stare at Melindra. She had a large clay pitcher in one hand, not Spear's, and her face was not veiled, but her eyes seemed to be weighing him. Now listen, Melindra, I can explain everything. What must be explained? She asked, flinging her free arm around his shoulders. Even with the sudden jolt, he tried to stand straighter. He still was not used to having to look up at a woman. I knew you would seek your own honor. The Kar casts a great shadow, but no man wishes to spend his life in the shade. Closing his mouth hurriedly, he managed a faint, of course. She was not going to try to kill him. That's it exactly. In his relief, he took the pitcher from her, but his gulp turned into a sputter. It was the rawest double-distilled brandy he had ever tasted. She retrieved the pitcher long enough to take a draw, then sighed gratefully and pushed it back at him. He was a man of much honor, Mat Cauthon.
What the hell?
Better that you had captured him, but even by killing him, you have gained much G. It was well that you sought him out. Despite himself, Mat looked at what he had been avoiding and shivered. A leather cord tied in short, flame-red hair held Couladin's head atop the 10-foot pole, near where the Aielmen were dancing. The thing seemed to be grinning at him. Sought Couladin out. He had done his best to keep the pikes between him and any of the Shaido. But that arrow had clipped the side of his head, and he was on the ground before he knew it, struggling to get his feet, with the fight raging all around him, laying about his even-marked spear, trying to make it back to Pips. Couladin had appeared as if springing out of air, veiled for killing. But there had been no mistaking those bare arms entwined with dragons, glittering gold and red. The man had been cutting a swath into the pikemen with his spears, shouting for Rand to show himself, shouting that he was the true Ka'akarn. Maybe he really believed it by then. Mat still did not know whether Couladin had recognized him, but it made no difference, not when the fellow decided to carve a hole through him to find Rand. He did not know who had cut off Couladin's head afterward, either. I was too busy trying to stay alive to watch, he thought sourly, and hoping Back in the Two Rivers, he had been as fine a hand with a quarterstaff as anyone. And a quarterstaff was not so different from a spear. But Couladin must have been born with the things in his hands. Of course, that skill had not availed the man much in the end. Maybe I still have a little bit of luck. Please, light, let it show itself now. He was thinking of how to get rid of Melindra so he could settle Pips, when Talmanis presented himself with a formal bow, hand to heart in the Carrienan fashion. Here are you, Mat. You, Mat said absently. She was not. He wanted to take a ride. They said Aiel could run down horses. A delegation came from the city during the night. There will be a triumphal procession for the Lord Dragon in gratitude from Carrion. Well, there. She had to have duties of some sort. The maidens were always flocking around Rand. Maybe she would be called off for that. Glancing at her, though, he did not think he had better count on it. Her wide smile was proprietary. The delegation was from the High Lord Mylan, Elysion said, joining them. Oh, that is correct, both hands sweeping wide but hasty. It is he who offers the procession to the Lord Dragon. Lord Dobrain, Lord Marengil, and Lady Colaver, among others, also came to the Lord Dragon. Mat pulled his mind back to the moment. Each of the pair was trying to pretend the other of them did not exist, both looking right at him, with never the flicker of an eye toward each other. But their faces were as tight as their voices from the strain, their hands white-knuckled on sword hilts. It would be a cap to everything if they came to blows, and him likely still trying to hobble out of reach when one of them ran him through by accident. What does it matter who sent a delegation as long as Rand gets his procession? It matters that you should ask him for our rightful place at the head, Talmanis said quickly. You slew Couladin and earned us that place. Elysion closed his mouth. Plainly, he had been about to say the same thing. You two ask him, Mat said. It's none of my affair. Melindra's hand tightened on the back of his neck, but he did not care. Moraine would surely not be far from Rand. He was not about to put his neck in a second noose, while still trying to think his way out of the first. Talmanis and Elysion gaped at him as if he were demented. You are our battle leader, Elysion protested. Our general. My body servant will polish your boots, Talmanis put in with a small smile that he carefully did not direct at the square-faced tyrant. And brush and mend your clothes, so you will appear at your best. Elysion gave his oiled beard a jerk. His eyes
Right
to the other man before he could stop them. If I may offer, I have a good coat I think will fit you well. Gold satin and crimson. It was the Carienan's turn to glower. General, Matt exclaimed, holding himself up with the spear hand. I'm no flaming... I wouldn't want to usurp your place. Let them figure out which one of them he meant. Burn my soul, Elysion said. It was your battle skill that won for us and kept us alive. Not to mention your luck. I've heard how you always turn the right card. But it is more than that. I'd follow you if you had never met the Lord Dragon. You are our leader, Talmanis said right on top of him, in a voice more somber, if no less certain. Until yesterday, I have followed men of other lands because I must. You I will follow because I want to. Perhaps you are not a lord in Andor, but here, I say that you are. And I pledge myself your man. Carianan and Tyron stared at one another as though startled at voicing their opinions. Then slowly, reluctantly, exchanged brief nods. If they did not like each other, they would bet against that. They could meet on this point, after a fashion. I will send my groom to prepare your horse for the procession, Talmanis said. And Elysion added, mine can share the work. Your mount must do us proud. And burn my soul, we need a banner. Your banner. At that, the Carianan nodded emphatically. Matt was not sure whether to laugh hysterically or sit down and cry. Those bloody memories. If not for them, he would have ridden on. If not for Rand, he would not have the things. He could trace the steps that led to them, each necessary as it seemed at the time, seeming an end in itself, yet each leading inevitably to the next. At the beginning, lay Rand, and bloody Tumviran. He could not understand why doing something that seemed absolutely necessary and as close to harmless as he could make it always seemed to lead him deeper into the mire. Melindra had begun stroking the back of his neck instead of squeezing it. All he needed now was up the hill, and there she was. Moraine, on her delicate-stepping white mare, with Lan on his black stallion towering at her side. The warder bent toward her as if to listen, and there seemed to be a brief argument, a violent protest on his part. But after a moment, the Aes Sedai reined Aldib around and rode out of sight toward the opposite slope. Lan remained where he was on Mondarb, watching the camp below, watching Matt. He shivered. Couladin's head really did appear to be grinning at him. He could almost hear the man speak. You may have killed me, but you've put your foot squarely in the trap. I'm dead, but you'll never be free. Just bloody wonderful, he muttered, and took a long, choking swallow of the rough brandy. Talmanis and Elysion seemed to think he meant it as said, and Melindra laughed agreement. Some 50 or so Tyrans in Carianan had gathered to watch the two speak to him, and they took his drinking as a signal to serenade him, beginning with a verse of their own. We'll toss the dice however they fall, and snuggle the girls, be they short or tall. Then follow young Matt whenever he calls, to dance with Jack of the Shadows. With a wheezing laugh he could not stop, Matt sank back down onto the boulder and set about emptying the pitcher. There had to be some way out of this. There just had to be. Rand's eyes opened slowly, staring at the roof of his tent. He was naked beneath a single blanket. The absence of pain seemed almost startling. Yet he felt even weaker than he remembered. And he did remember. He had said things, thought things. His skin went cold. I cannot let him take control. I am me. Me. Fumbling beneath the blanket, he found the smooth, round scar on his side. Tender, yet whole. Moraine Sedai healed you, Aviendha said, and he gave a start. He had not seen her, sitting cross-legged on the layered rugs near the fire pit, sipping from a silver cup worked with leopards. Osmodian lay sprawled across tasseled cushions, chin on his arms. Neither appeared to have slept. Dark circles underlined their eyes. She should not have had sleep, Avienda went on in a cool voice. Tired or not, she had every hair in place, and her neat clothes were a sharp contrast to Osmodian's rumpled dark velvets. Now and then she twisted the ivory bracelet of roses and thorns that he had given her, as if not realizing what she was doing. She wore the silver snowflake necklace, too. She still had not told him who had given it to her, though she had seemed amused when she realized he really wanted to know. He did not look amused now. Moraine Sedai herself was near collapse and feeling wounded. Anna Line had to carry her to her tent. Because of you, Randall Thor. Because healing you took the last of her strength. The Aes Sedai is on her feet already, Osmodian put in, stifling a yawn. He ignored Avienda's pointed stare. She has been here twice since sunrise, though she said you would recover. I think she was not so certain last night. Nor was I. Pulling his gilded harp around in front of him, speaking in an idle tone. I did what I could for you, of course. My life and fortune are tied to yours. But my talents lie elsewhere than healing, you understand. He strummed a few notes to demonstrate. I understand that a man can kill or gentle himself doing what you did. Strength and the power is useless if the body is exhausted. saidin can kill easily if the body is exhausted. Or so I have heard. Are you finished sharing your wisdom, Jason Natale? Avienda's tone was chillier, if anything, and she did not wait for a reply before turning a gaze like blue-green ice back to Rand. The interruption, it seemed, was his fault.
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
A man may behave like a fool sometimes, and little is the worse for it.
Hope you're
But
doing
a chief
well.
must be more than a man, and the chief of chiefs more still. You had no right to push yourself near to death. Egwene and I tried to make you come with us when we grew too tired to continue, but you would not listen. You may be as much stronger than we as Egwene claims, yet you are still flesh. You are the Kara Khan, not a new Sayadun seeking honor. You have obligation
Oh,
with
shit.
Maria, Randolph.
Yeah, that's always the part
You
that
cannot
sucks is
fulfill it
waiting
here.
on re-up.
You cannot do everything yourself.
I kind of sort of am
For a
too.
moment,
That's why I've been
you could only
trying to
gape
take it a little easy on my dabs,
Rand,
just
or
because
anything at all. Had left the battle to others for all practical purposes, while he
a little
stumbled
bit
about
left.
trying to be useful. He had
At
not
least
even
at
been
this
able to
one.
stop Samael from striking where and as he chose, and she upbraided him for doing too much.
This one I got a little
I
bit
will
more.
try to remember, he said finally. Even so, she looked ready to lecture more. What news of Miagoma and the other 3 clans, he asked, as much to
Oh,
divert her
shit.
as because he wanted to know.
Yeah, this one
Women
is still
seldom seemed willing to
the
stop
Island
until
OG
they had
that I've been
found you
smoking
would
on.
unless you managed to distract them.
That's almost gone.
She was full of what she knew, of course, and as eager to instruct as to scold. Osmodian's soft strumming, for once something pleasant, even pastoral, made an odd background for her words. The Miagoma, the Shianda, the Darine, and the Kodara were camped within sight of her, 2 miles to the east. A steady stream of men and maidens moved between the camps, including Rand's, but only among societies. And Indirian and the other chiefs were not stirring.
Let's do a dab
There
of
was
this
no
one.
doubt now that
Just
they would
got done
come to
smoking
Rand
a
eventually,
A
but not
joint
until the wise ones finished their talk.
of my
They
bloody
are still
skunk,
speaking, Rand said.
and that's getting down
What under the light
pretty
there to
low.
discuss that takes so long? The chiefs are coming to
Hell
follow
yeah.
me, not them. She gave him a flat look that would have done credit to Moraine. The wise one's words are for wise ones, Randall Thor. Hesitating, she added, as if making a comment. Egwene may tell you something of it when it is done. Her tone implied that Egwene might not, too. She resisted his attempts to learn more, and finally he let it lie. Perhaps he would find out before it bit him, perhaps not. But either way, he was not going to pry one word out of her that she did not want to speak. Aes Sedai had nothing on Aiel Wise Ones when it came
Hell
to
yeah.
guarding their secrets and
I've been
surrendering
putting
themselves
in
to mystery.
a lot of
I
time
made
on
them
my
absorbing that particular lesson
Diablo
very well.
4.
Egwene's presence at the meeting of Wise Ones came as a surprise,
And definitely been
and so did
grinding on that.
Moiraine's absence. You would have expected her to be in the middle, twitching strings to her plans, but it turned out that one grew from the other. Wise One had wanted to meet with one of the Aes Sedai, and although she after hitting him, Moiraine claimed Egwene started from her blankets as a replacement. That may not be in the line. She had been outside when Soralea and Bear practically dragged Egwene from her tent, trying to pull on her clothes while they hustled her along. I called to her that she would have to dig holes with her teeth this time if she had been asleep, and she was so sleepy she believed me. She began protesting that she would not, so hard that Soralea began demanding that she had done the thing she deserved to. I've seen Egwene's face. She laughed so hard that she nearly toppled over. Osmodian actually looked at her askance, though why he should, being what and who he was.
That was a rough one. That was a little hot.
But Rand only waited patiently until she caught her breath. For Aiel humor, this was mild. More the sort of thing he would have expected from Mat than from any woman. But mild even so. When she straightened, wiping her eyes, he said, "What of the Shaido then? Or are there Wise Ones also at this conclave?" She answered, still giggling into her wine. She considered the Shaido finished. Hardly worth considering now. Thousands of prisoners had been taken, with a trickle still being brought in, and the fighting had died down except for a few small skirmishes here and there. Yet the more he got out of her, the less he could see them as done for. With the four clans keeping Han occupied, the bulk of Couladin's people had crossed the Galen in good order, even carrying away most of the Carianan prisoners they had captured. Worse, they had destroyed the stone bridges behind them. That did not concern her, but it did him. Tens of thousands of Shaido north of the river, no way to get at them until the bridges were replaced, and even wooden spans would take time. It was time that he did not have. At the very end, when it seemed there was no more to say on the Shaido, she told him what made him forget worrying about the Shaido and what trouble they would cause. She just tossed it in, as if she had almost forgotten. "Mat killed Couladin?" he said incredulously when she was done. "Mat? Did I not say so?" The words were short. Peering at him over her wine cup, she seemed more interested in how he would take the news than in whether he doubted her word. Osmodian plucked a few chords of something martial. The harp seemed to echo to drums and trumpets. "In some ways, a young man of as many surprises as you. I truly look forward to meeting the third of you, this Heron, one day." Rand shook his head. So Mat had not escaped the pull of ta'veren to ta'veren after all. Or maybe it was the pattern that had caught him, and being ta'veren himself. Either way, he suspected Mat was not too happy right that moment. Mat had not learned the lesson that he had. Try to run away, and the pattern pulled you back, often roughly. Run in the direction the wheel wove you, and sometimes you could manage a little control over your life. Sometimes. With luck, maybe more than any expected, at least in the long haul. But he had more urgent matters than Mat or the Shaido. A glance at the entrance told him the sun was well up, though all he saw otherwise was two maidens squatting just outside, spears across their knees. A night and most of a morning with him unconscious, and Samael had either not tried to find him or had failed. He was careful to use that name, even to himself, though another floated in the back of his mind now. Tel Janin Elensar. No history recorded the name. Fragment in the library at Tarvalin. Moiraine had told him everything the Aes Sedai knew of the Forsaken, and it was little more than was told in village tales. Even Osmodian had always called him Samael. if for a different reason. Long before the War of the Shadow ended, the Forsaken had embraced the names men had given them, as if symbols of rebirth in the shadow. Asmodean's own true name, Joar Adam Nasosin, made the man flinch, and he claimed to have forgotten the others in the course of 3,000 years. Perhaps there was no real reason to hide what was going on inside his head. Maybe it was only an attempt to deny reality to himself. But Samael, the man, would remain. And as Samael, he would pay in full for every maiden he had killed. The maidens Rand had not been able to keep safe. Even as he made the resolution, he grimaced. He had made a beginning by sending Wyraman back to Tyr. The light willing, only he and Wyraman knew how much of one so far. But he could not go chasing off after Samael, whatever he wanted or vowed. Not yet. There were matters to be seen to here in Cairhien first. Aviendha might think he did not understand Giotto, and perhaps he did not. But he understood duty, and he had one to Cairhien. Besides, there were ways to tail it in with Wyraman. Sitting up, and trying not to show the effort of it, he covered himself as decently as he could in the blanket, and wondered where his clothes were. He did not see anything but his boots standing over behind Aviendha. She probably knew. It might have been Guy Shine who undressed him, but it could just as easily be. I need to go into the city. Mateo, have Jotun saddled and brought up. Tomorrow, perhaps, Aviendha told him firmly, catching Asmodean's coat sleeve as he started to rise. Moraine Sedai said you would need to rest for today, Aviendha. Now. I don't know why Mylan isn't here if he's alive, but I mean to find out. Natail, my horse? She put on a stubborn face, but Asmodean jerked his arm free, smoothing the wrinkled velvet, and said, Mylan was here, and others. He was not to be told, Aviendha began angrily, then tightened her mouth before finishing, he needs to rest. So, the wise ones thought they could keep things from him. Well, he was not as weak as they believed. He tried to stand, holding the blanket close, and turned the motion into shifting his position when his legs refused to cooperate. Maybe he was as weak as they thought, but he did not intend to let that stop him. I can rest when I'm dead, he said, and wished he had not, when she flinched as if he had hit her. No, she would not have flinched at a blow. His staying alive was important to her for the Aiel's sake, and a threat there could hurt her more than a fist. Tell me about Mylan, Natail. Aviendha kept his soul in silence, though if looks had had anything to do with it, Asmodean would have been struck dumb as well. A rider had come from Mylan in the night, bearing flowery praises and assurances of undying loyalty. At dawn, Mylan himself appeared, with the 6 other High Lords of Tyr, who were in the city, and a small host of Tyrant soldiers, who fingered sword hilts and gripped lances, as though more than half expecting to fight the Aiel, who had stood silently watching them ride in. It came close, Asmodean said. This Mylan is not used to being thwarted, I think. And the others scarcely more so. Especially the lumpy-faced one, Torion and Simon. That one has eyes as sharp as his nose. You know, I am used to dangerous company, but these men are as dangerous in their way as any I have known. Aviendha sniffed loudly. Whatever they are used to, they had no choice with Soralia and Amis and Bear and Malaine on one side, and Sulin with 1,000 Farder-Eyes Mai on the other. And there were some stone dogs, she conceded, and a few water seekers, and some red shields. If you truly serve the Ka Khan as you claim, Jason Natail, you should guard his rest as they do. It is the dragon reborn. The Ka Khan, I need you. Go on, Natail, Rand said impatiently, earning a sniff for himself. She was right concerning the tyrant's choices, though perhaps the maidens and others fingering their veils had concerned them more than the wise ones. In any case, even Arakon, a graying, slender man with a long, smoldering temper, had been near bursting aflame by the time they reined their horses around. And Graham, bald as a stone and wide as a blacksmith, was white-faced in rage. Asmodean was not sure whether it had been the certainty of being overwhelmed that stopped them drawing swords, or the realization that if they somehow managed to cut a path to Rand, he was unlikely to welcome them with his allies on their blades. Mylan's eyes were bulging out of his head, the man finished. But before leaving, he shouted out his allegiance and fealty to you. Perhaps he thought you might hear. The others echoed him quickly. Yet Mylan added something that made them stare. I make a gift of Kyrian to the Lord Dragon, he said. Then he announced that he would prepare a grand triumph for you when you are ready to enter the city. There's an old saying in the Two Rivers, Rand said dryly. The louder a man tells you he's honest, the harder you must hold on to your purse. Another said, the fox often offers to give the duck its pond. Arian was his without gifts from Mylan. He had no doubts about the man's loyalty. It would last just as long as Mylan believed he would be destroyed if caught betraying Rand. If caught, that was the hook. Those 7 High Lords in Kyrian had been the most assiduous in trying to see him dead in Tyr. That was why he had sent them here. Had he executed every tyrant noble who plotted against him, there might have been none left. At the time, handing them anarchy, famine, and civil war to deal with 1,000 miles from Tyr, it seemed a good way to crimp in their schemes, while doing some good where it needed doing. Of course, he had not even known Couladin existed then, much less that the man would lead him to Kyrian. It would be easier if this was a story, he thought. In stories, there were only so many surprises before
What y'all smoking on tonight?
He himself never seemed to know a quarter of everything. Asmodean hesitated. That old saying about shouting men might be applied to him, too, as he was no doubt aware. But when Rand said no more, he added, I think he wants to be king of Kyrian, subject to you, of course. And preferably with me far away.
Yeah.
I probably expected Rand to return to Tyr.
Me, I'm smoking on some
Mylan certainly would never be afraid of too much power.
freak show and some island
Of
OG.
course. Asmodean sounded even drier than Rand had. There was another visit between those two. A dozen Kyrianan lords and ladies, without retainers, came cloaked and with faces hidden in their hoods despite the heat. Plainly they knew that the Aiel despised Kyrianan, and just as plainly returned the sentiment. Yet they were as nervous that Mylan might discover they had come as that the Aiel might decide to kill them. When they saw me, Asmodean said wryly, half seemed ready to kill me for fear I was tyrant. You have Farderai's might to thank that you still have a bard. Few as they were, the Kyrianan had still been harder to turn back than Mylan, growing sweatier and more white-faced by the minute, but stubbornly demanding to see the Lord Dragon. It was a measure of their desire that when demands failed, they finally descended to open begging. Asmodean might have thought Aiel humor odd or harsh, but he chuckled over nobles in silk coats and riding dresses, trying to pretend he was not there as they knelt to catch at the Wise One's woolen skirts. Sorilea threatened to have them stripped and flogged back to the city. His muted laughter turned disbelieving. They actually discussed it among themselves. Had the requirement allowed them to teach you, I do believe some would have accepted. Sorilea should have done it, Avienda put in, surprisingly agreeable. The Oathbreakers have no honor. At last, Mullane had the maidens throw them across their horses like bundles and run the animals from camp, with the Oathbreakers hanging on as they might. Asmodean nodded. But before that, 2 of them did speak to me, once they were certain I was not a tyrant spy. Lord Dobrain and Lady Colavere. They clouded everything in so many hints and innuendos that I cannot be certain. But I would not be surprised if they mean to offer you the Sun Throne. They could bandy words with some people I used to be acquainted with. Rand barked a laugh. Maybe they will, if they can manage the same terms as Mylan. He had not needed Moraine to tell him that Carianan played the game of houses in their sleep, nor Asmodean to tell him they were tried with the Forsaken. The High Lords to the left and the Carianan to the right. One battle done, and another, of a different sort, if no less dangerous, beginning. In any case, I mean the Sun Throne for someone who has a right to it. He ignored the speculation on Asmodean's face. Perhaps the man had tried to help him the night before, perhaps he had not. But he did not trust the fellow enough to let him know half of his plans. However much Asmodean's future might be tied to his loyalty was all necessity. He was still the same man who had chosen to give his soul to the shadow. Mylan wants to give me a grand entry when I am ready, does he? So much the better that I see what's what before he expects me. It came to him why Avienda had become so agreeable, even helping the talk along. As long as he sat here talking, he was doing exactly what she wanted. Are you going to get my horse in a tail, or must I? Asmodean's bow was deep, formal, and on the surface at least, sincere. I serve the Lord Dragon. Chapter 46. Other battles, other weapons. Frowning after Asmodean, and wondering how far he trusted the man, Rand was startled when Avienda threw down her cup, splashing wine onto the rugs. Aiel did not waste anything that could be drunk, not only water. Staring at the wet spot, she appeared just as surprised, but only for a moment. The next instant, she had planted fists on hips where she sat and was glaring at him.
Oh shit.
So,
Yeah,
the
reclining is
Kar-Kar
always a
went to the city
pain.
when he can barely sit up. I said the Kar-Kar must be more than other men, but I did not know he was more than mortal. Where are my clothes, Avienda? You are only flesh. My clothes. Remember your toes, Randall. If I can remember Giotto, so can you.
Oh shit.
That seemed a strange thing to
That
say.
always sucks.
The sun would rise at midnight before she forgot the smallest scrap of Giotto. If you keep on like this, he said with a smile, I'll begin thinking you care for me. He meant it for a jest. There were only two ways to deal with her, joke or simply override her. Arguing was fatal, and a mild one, considering they had spent a night in each other's arms. But her eyes went wide in outrage, and she jerked at the ivory bracelet as if to pull it off and throw it at him. The Kar-Kar is so far
Nice.
above other men that he does not need clothes, she spat. If he wishes to go, let him go in his skin. Must I bring Sorlia and Bear? Or perhaps Enila and Samara and Lamel? He stiffened. Of all the maidens who treated him as a long-lost son of Ten, she had chosen the three worst. Lamel even brought him soup. The woman could not cook a lick, but she insisted on making him soup. You bring whoever you wish, he told her in a tight, flat voice. But I am the Kar-Kar, and I am going into the city. With what he could find his clothes before she returned. Samara was nearly as tall as he, and at the moment probably stronger. The one power certainly would do him no good. He could not have embraced Saladin if someone appeared in front of him, but he held on to it. For a long moment she met his stare, then abruptly picked up the leopard-worked cup and refilled it from a hammered silver pitcher. If you can find your clothes and dress yourself without falling down, she said calmly, you may go. And if I think you will continue, you will return here if Samara must carry you in her arms. He stared as she stretched out on one elbow, carefully arranged her skirts, and began to If he mentioned marriage again, no doubt she would snap his head off again. But in some ways, she behaved as if they were married. The worst parts of it, at least. The parts that did not seem a pennyworth different from Enila or Lamel at their worst. Muttering to himself, he gathered the blanket around him and shuffled past her and the fire pit to his boots. Clean woolen stockings were folded up inside, but nothing else. He could summon Guy Shine and have the entire matter spread through the camp. not to mention the possibility that the maidens would get into it after all. Then the question would be whether he was the Ka Khan who must be obeyed, or just Randall Thor, another man entirely in their eyes. A rolled rug at the back of the tent caught his eye. Rugs were always spread out. His sword was inside, the belt with the dragon buckle wrapped around the scabbard. Humming to herself, eyes lidded, Aviendha looked half asleep as she watched him search. You no longer need that. She invested the word with so much disgust that no one would have believed she had given him the sword. What do you mean? There were only a few small chests in the tent, inlaid with mother of pearl or worked in brass, or in one case, gold leaf. The Aiel preferred putting things in bundles. Nothing held his clothes. The gold-covered chest, all unfamiliar birds and animals, held tightly tied leather sacks and gave off a smell of spices when he raised the lid. Couladin is dead, Randall Thor. Startled, he stopped and stared at her. What are you talking about? Would Lan have told her? No one else knew. But why? No one told me, if that is what you are thinking. I know you now, Randall Thor. I learn you more every day. I wasn't thinking any such thing, he growled. There isn't anything anybody could tell. Irritably, he snatched up the scabbarded sword and carried it awkwardly under his arm as he went on searching. Aviendha continued sipping wine. He thought she might be hiding a smile. A fine thing. The High Lords of Tyr sweated when Randall Thor looked at them, and the Cairhienin might offer him their throne. The greatest Aiel army the world had ever seen had crossed the Dragon Wall on the orders of the Ka Karn, the chief of chiefs. Nations trembled at the mention of the Dragon Reborn. Nations. And if he did not find his clothes, he would sit waiting on permission to go outside from a lot of women who thought they knew better about everything than he did. He finally found them when he noticed the gold-embroidered cuff of a red coat sleeve sticking out from under Aviendha. She had been sitting on them all along. She grunted sourly when he asked her to move, but she did it, finally. As usual, she watched him shave and dress, channeling the water hot for him without comment and without being asked. After the third time, he nicked himself and muttered about cold water. In truth, this time he was bothered as much because she might see his unsteadiness as for any other cause. You can become used to anything if it goes on long enough, he thought wryly. She misunderstood his head shaking. Elaine will not mind if I look, Randall Thor. Pausing with the laces of his shirt half done, he stared at her. Do you
Hey, Bastian, how you doing, bro?
Of course.
Let's do a dab since you're here.
Laughing silently, he went back to the laces. It was good to be reminded that her newfound mystery hid ignorance, aside from anything else. He could not help smiling smugly as he finished dressing, buckled on his sword, and took up the tasseled Seanchan spearhead. That last turned the smile a touch toward grimness. He had meant it as a reminder that the Seanchan were still in the world, but it served to recall all the things that he must juggle. Cairhienin and Tyrants, Samael and the other Forsaken, the Shaido, and nations that did not know him yet. Nations that would have to before Tarmangaden. Dealing with Aviendha was really quite simple compared with that. Maidens leaped to their feet when he walked out of the tent quickly to hide the unsteadiness of his legs. He was not sure how far he succeeded. Aviendha kept to his side as though she not only intended to catch him if he fell over, but fully expected him to. It did nothing for his mood when Sulin, in her cap of bandages, looked questioningly at her, not him, her, and waited for her nod before ordering him to move. Riding his mule up the hill, trodden by the reins. Somehow he had found time to don fresh clothes, all dark green silk, with spills, hung on his back, but he had given up wearing the Gleeman's cloak, and he no longer carried the crimson badge, ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai. That office fell to a Kyrianan refugee named Pevin, an expressionless fellow in a patched farmer's coat of rough, dark gray wool, on a brown mule that should have been put out to grass from pulling a cart some years back. A long scar, still red, ran up the side of his narrow face from jaw to thinning hair. Pevin had lost his wife and sister to the famine, his brother and a son to the Civil War. He had no idea which house's men had killed them, or who they had supported for the Sun Throne. Fleeing toward Andor had cost him a second son at the hands of Andoran soldiers, and a second brother to bandits, and returning had cost the last son, dead on a Shido spear, and his daughter as well, shot off while Pevin was left for dead. The man rarely spoke, but as near as Rand could make out, his beliefs had been winnowed down to a bare three. The dragon had been reborn. The last battle was coming, and if he stayed close to Rand al'Thor, he would see his family avenged before the world was destroyed. The world would end, surely, but it did not matter. Nothing did, so long as he saw that vengeance. He bowed silently to Rand from his saddle as the mare reached the crest. His face was absolutely blank, but he held the banner straight and steady. Climbing onto Jotun, Rand pulled Aviendha up behind him without letting her use a stirrup, just to show her that he could, and kicked the dapple into motion before she was settled. She flung both arms around his waist, grumbling only partly under her breath. He caught a few more snippets of her current opinion of Rand al'Thor, and of the Kar-Karn, too. She made no move to let go, though, for which he was grateful. Not only was it pleasant having her pressed against his back, the support was welcome. With her halfway to the saddle, he had suddenly not been sure whether she was coming up or he down. He hoped she had not noticed. He hoped that was not why she was holding on to him so tightly. The crimson banner, with its large black and white disc, rippled behind Pevin as they zigzagged down the hill and along the shallow valleys. As usual, the Aiel gave little attention to the party as it passed, though the banner marked his presence as surely as the encircling escort of several hundred Farder Mai easily keeping pace with Jotun and the mules. They went on about their business among the tents, covering the slopes, at most glancing up at the sound of hooves. It had been startling to hear of nearly 20,000 prisoners taken from Couladin's followers. Until leaving the Two Rivers, he had never really believed so many people could be in one place. But seeing them was twice the shock. In clusters of 40 or 50, they dotted the hillsides like cabbages, men and women alike, sitting naked in the sun, each cluster under the eyes of one Guy Shine, if that. Certainly no one else paid them much mind, though now and again a cotton-sore-clad figure approached one of the groups and ordered a man or woman off on an errand. Whoever was called out went at a run, unguarded, and Rand saw several returning to slip back into their places. For the rest, they sat quietly, almost looking bored, as if they had no reason to be elsewhere, or desire to be either. Perhaps they would put on white robes just as calmly. Yet he could not help remembering how easily these same people had violated their own laws and customs already. Couladin might have begun the violation, or ordered it. They had followed and obeyed. Frowning at the prisoners, 20,000 and more to come, he would certainly never trust one to hold to Guy Shine. It took some time before he noticed an oddity among the other Aiel. Maidens and Aielmen who carried the spear never wore anything on their heads except the shufa, and never any color that would not fade into rocks and shadows. But now he saw men with a narrow scarlet headband. Perhaps one in 4 or 5 had a strip of cloth knotted around his temples, with a disc embroidered or painted above the brows. 2 joined teardrops, black and white. Perhaps most strangely of all, Guy Shine wore it too. Most had their cowls up, but every last bare-headed one wore it. Idal Guide Siswai and their cotton sore saw and did nothing. Whether wearing the headband or not, Guy Shine were never to wear anything that those who could touch weapons did. Never. I do not know. Avienda said curtly into his back when he asked what it meant. He tried to sit up straighter. She really did seem to be holding him more tightly than necessary. After a moment, she went on, so softly that he had to listen sharp to catch it all. Bear threatened to strike me if I mentioned it again, and Sorlia hit me across the shoulders with a stick. But I think there are those who claim we are Siswayaman. Rand opened his mouth to ask the meaning. He knew a scant few words of the old tongue, no more. When interpretation floated to the surface in his mind. Siswayaman. Literally, the spear of the dragon. Sometimes, Asmodean chuckled, it is difficult to see the difference between oneself and one's enemies. They want to own the world, but it seems you already own a people. Turning his head, Rand stared at him until amusement faded, and, shrugging uncomfortably, he let his mule fall back beside Pevin in the banner. The trouble was that the name did imply, more than implied, ownership. That was out of Luce Theron's memories, too. It did not seem possible to own people, but if it was, he did not want to. All I want is to use them, he thought wryly. I see you don't believe it, he said over his shoulder. None of the maidens had donned the thing. Avienda hesitated before saying, I do not know what to believe. She spoke as quietly as before, yet she sounded angry and unsure. There are many beliefs, and the wise ones are often silent, as if they do not know the truth. Some say that in following you, we expiate the sin of our ancestors in failing the Aes Sedai. The catch in her voice startled him. He had never considered that she might be as worried as any other Aiel about what he had revealed of their past. Ashamed might be a better word than worried. Shame was an important part of Giotto. They were ashamed of what they had been, followers of the Way of the Leaf, and at the same time, ashamed that they had abandoned their past. Too many have heard some version of part of the prophecy of Rodion now, she went on in a more controlled tone. For all the world, as if she had heard a word of that prophecy herself before she began training to become a wise one. But it has been twisted. They know that you will destroy us. Her control faltered in the space of one deep breath. But many believe that you will kill us all in endless dances of the spear, a sacrifice to atone for the sin. Others believe the bleakness itself is a testing, to wear away all the power before the last battle. I've even heard some say that the Aiel are now your dream, and that when you awake from this life, we will be no more. A grim set of beliefs, that. Bad enough that he had revealed the past they saw as shaming. It was a wonder they had not all left him, or gone mad. What do the wise ones believe? He asked as quietly as she. That what must be will be. We will save what can be saved, Randall. We do not.
Hell yeah, fire. About to do another dab.
She included herself among the wise ones, just as Egwene and Elaine included themselves among the Aes Sedai. Well, he said lightly, I expect Sorlia at least believes I should have my ears boxed. Probably Bear does too. Certainly Malay. Among other things, she mumbled. To his disappointment, she pushed away from him, although keeping a hold on his coat. They believe many things I could wish they did not. He grinned in spite of himself. So she did not believe he needed his ears boxed. That was a pleasant change since waking. Adnan Kadir's wagons lay a mile or so from his tent, circled in a broad depression between two hills where stone dogs kept watch. A cream-colored coat straining over his bulk, the hatchet-nosed dark friend looked up, mopping his face with the inevitable large handkerchief as Rand rode past with his banner and loping escort. Moraine was there as well, examining the wagon where the door-framed Tirangriel was lashed under canvas behind the driver's seat. She did not even glance around until Kadir spoke to her. By his gestures, he was plainly suggesting that she might want to accompany Rand. In fact, he appeared eager for her to go, and small wonder. He had to be congratulating himself on keeping his being a dark friend hidden so long, but the more he was in the company with an Aes Sedai, the more he was in danger of discovery. Indeed, it was a surprise to Rand that the man was still there. At least half of the drivers who entered the waiting room had slipped away since the wagon placed by Kyrian refugees chosen by Rand himself, to make sure they were not of Kadyr's sort. He expected every morning to find the fellow himself gone too, especially since the Sentinels escaped. The maidens had nearly torn the wagons apart, while Kadir sweated his way through 3 handkerchiefs. Rand would not regret it if Kadir managed to sneak off in the night. The Aiel guards had orders to let him go, so long as he did not try to take Moiraine's precious wagons. More obviously every day, their loads were a treasure to him. Rand did not see him lose them. He glanced over his shoulder, staring straight ahead, ignoring the wagons altogether. He claimed to have had contact with Kadir since Rand captured him. Rand thought it might be true. Certainly the merchant never left his wagon outside by Aiel guards inside his own wagon. Opposite the wagons, Rand half drew rein without thinking. Surely Moiraine would want to accompany him into Cairhien. She might have crammed his head full, but it always seemed there was another piece she wanted to fit in. And this once in particular he could do with her presence and advice. But she merely looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the wagon. Frowning, he heeled the dapple on. As well to remember she had other sheep to shear than he knew about. He had become too trusting. Best to be as wary of her as of Osmodian. Trust no one, he thought bleakly. For an instant, he did not know whether it was his thought or Lews Therin's. But in the end, he decided it did not matter. Everybody had their own goals, their own desires. Much the best to trust no one completely except himself. Yet he wondered, with another man oozing through the back of his mind, how far he could trust himself. Vultures filled the sky around Cairhien in spiraling layers of black wings. On the ground they flapped about among clouds of buzzing flies, squawking hoarsely at glossy ravens that tried to usurp their rights to the dead. Where Aiel went across the treeless hills recovering the bodies of their slain, the birds lumbered aloft fatly, screeching protests, then settled again as soon as the living humans were a few paces gone. Vultures and ravens and flies together could not really have made the sunlight dimmer, yet it seemed so. Stomach twisting, trying not to see, Rand heeled Jotun faster until Aviendha clung to his back once more and the maidens were running. No one protested, and he did not believe it was only because Aiel could maintain that speed for hours. Even Osmodian looked pale around the eyes. Evan's face never changed, though the bright banner whipping above him appeared a mockery in that place. What lay ahead was little better. Rand remembered the foregate as a raucous beehive, a tangled warren of streets full of noise and color. Now it was a still, thick band of ashes surrounding the square gray walls of Cairhien on 3 sides. Charred timbers lay crazily atop stone foundations, and here and there a soot-black chimney yet stood, sometimes tilting precariously. In places, a chair lying somehow untouched in the dirt street, a hasty bundle dropped by someone fleeing, a rag doll emphasized the desolation. Breezes stirred some of the banners in the city's towers and along the walls, a dragon standing out red and gold on white at one place, the crescents of Tyr, white on red and gold at another. The middle set of the Jangai gates stood open, 3 tall square arches in the gray stone, guarded by Tyrant soldiers in rimmed helmets. Some were mounted, but most afoot, and the variously colored stripes on their wide sleeves showed they were retainers of several lords. Whatever was known in the city about the battle being won, and Aiel allies coming to the rescue, the approach of 1,000 Farner Mai created some little stir. Hands went uncertainly to sword hilts, or spears and long shields, or lances. Some of the soldiers half moved as if to close the gates, even while looking to their officer, with 3 white plumes on his helmet, who hesitated, standing in his stirrups and shading his eyes against the sun to study the crimson banner, and more particularly, Rand. Abruptly, the officer sat down, saying something that sent 2 of the mounted tyrants galloping back through the gates. Almost immediately, he was waving the other men aside, calling, "Make way for the Lord Dragon Randall Thor! The light illumine the Lord Dragon! All glory to the Dragon Reborn!" The soldiers still appeared uneasy about the maidens, but they formed into lines to either side of the gates, bowing deeply as Rand rode through. Aviendha sniffed loudly at his back, and again when he laughed. She did not understand, and he had no intention of explaining. What amused him was that however hard Tyrans or Carianan or anyone else tried to puff up his head, he could rely on her and the maidens, at least, to take the swelling down, and Egwene, and Moraine, and Elaine, and Nynaeve, for that matter, if he ever saw either again. Come to think of it, a lot of them seemed to make that a large part of their life's work. The city beyond the gates stilled his laughter. Here the streets were paved, some broad enough for a dozen or more large wagons abreast, all straight as knife cuts, crossing at right angles. The hills that rolled outside the walls were here carved and terraced, faced with stone. They looked as much made by men as the stone buildings with their severe straight lines and sharp angles, or the great towers with their unfinished tops, surrounded by scaffolding. People crowded the streets and the alleys, dull-eyed and hollow-cheeked, huddling beneath makeshift lean-tos or ragged blankets rigged as tents, or simply jammed together in the open, the dark clothes favored by Carianan city dwellers, and the bright colors of foregaters, and the rough garb of farmers and villagers. Even the scaffolds were filled, on every level to the very top, where folk looked tiny for the height. The middle of the streets remained clear as Rand and the maidens made their way along, and that only for as long as it took the people to surge out around them. It was the people who stilled his mirth. Worn and ragged as they were, jammed together like sheep in a too small pen, they cheered. He had no idea how they knew who he was, unless perhaps the officer's shouts at the gates had been heard. But a roar sprang ahead of him as he circled through the streets, the maidens forcing a way through the throng. The thunder of it overwhelmed any words except for the occasional Lord Dragon, when enough shouted it together. But the meaning was clear in men and women holding up their children to see him pass, in scarves and scraps of cloth waved from every window, in people who tried to push past the maidens with outstretched hands. They certainly seemed to have no fear of Aiel, not at the chance to lay a finger on Rand's boots, and their numbers were such, the pressure of hundreds shoving them forward, that some managed to wriggle through. Actually, a good many touched Osmodians instead. He certainly looked a lord in all his dripping lace, and perhaps they thought the Lord Dragon must be an older man than the youth in a red coat. But it made no difference. Whoever managed to put a hand to anyone's boot or stirrup, even Pevins, wore joy on their faces and mouthed Lord Dragon into the din, even as maidens forced them back with their bucklers. Between the clamor of acclaim and the riders sent by the officer at the gate, it was no surprise when Mylan appeared. A dozen less Tyrant lords for retinue and 50 defenders of the stone to clear his way, laying about them with the butts of their lances. Gray-haired, hard and lean in his fine silk coat with stripes and cuffs of green satin, the High Lord sat his saddle with the stiff-backed ease of one who had been put on a horse and taught to command it almost as soon as he could walk. He ignored the sweat on his face, and equally the possibility that his escort might trample someone. Both were minor annoyances, and the sweat likely the greater. Dorian, the pink-cheeked lordling who had come to Ironrod, was among the others, not quite so plump as he had been. So his red-striped coat hung on him. The only other Rand recognized was a broad-shouldered fellow in shades of green. Raimon had liked to play at cards with Mat back in the Stone, as he recalled. The others were older men for the most part. None displayed any more consideration of the crowd they plowed through than Marlin. There was not one Carianan in the lot. The maidens let Marlin ride through, and Rand nodded, but closed behind him to exclude the rest, a fact the High Lord did not notice at first. When he did, his dark eyes smoldered angrily. He was often angry, Marlin was, since Rand had first come to the Stone of Tyr. The noise began to abate with the tyrant arrival, fading to a dull murmur by the time Marlin made a rigid bow to Rand from his saddle. His gaze flickered to Aviendha before he decided to ignore her, just as he was trying to ignore the maidens. The light illumine you, my Lord Dragon. Be you welcome to Cairhien. I must apologize for the peasants, but I was unaware you meant to enter the city now. Had I known, they would have been cleared. I meant to give you a grand entry befitting the Dragon Reborn. I have had one, Rand said, and the other man blinked. As you say, my Lord Dragon. He went on after a moment, his tone making it clear that he did not understand. If you will accompany me to the royal palace, I have arranged a small greeting. Small indeed, I fear, since I had no warning of you. Yet, by this evening, I will make sure whatever you have arranged now will do. Rand cut in, and received another bow and a thin, oily smile for reply. The fellow was all subservience now, and in an hour he would be talking as to someone too feeble-witted to understand facts held under his nose. But beneath it all lay a contempt and hatred that he believed Rand did not see, although they shone in his eyes. Contempt because Rand was not a lord, not truly, as Mylan saw it, by birth. And hatred because Mylan had had the power of life and death before Rand came, with few his equal and none his superior. To believe that the prophecies of the dragon would be fulfilled someday was one thing. To have them fulfilled, and his own power diminished by them, was quite another. There was a moment of confusion before Rand made Sulin allow the other tyrant lords to bring their horses behind Osmodian and Heaven's Banner. Mylan would have had the defenders clear the way again, but Rand curtly ordered that they follow behind the maidens. The soldiers obeyed, faces unchanging beneath the rims of their helmets, though their white-plumed officer shook his head, and the High Lord put on a condescending smile. That smile faded when it became clear that the crowds opened up easily ahead of the maidens. That they did not have to club a path through, he attributed to the Aiel reputation for savagery, and frowned when Rand made no reply. One thing Rand made note of: now that he had Tyrans with him, the cheers did not rise again. The royal palace of Cairhien occupied the highest hill of the city, exactly in the center, square and dark and massive. In fact, between the palace, in all its levels, and the stone-faced terracing, it was hard to say there was a hill there at all. Lofty colonnaded walks and tall, narrow windows, high above the ground, did no more to relieve the rigidity than did gray, stepped towers, precisely placed in concentric squares of increasing height. The street became a long, broad ramp leading up to tall bronze gates, and a huge square courtyard beyond, lined with Tyrant soldiers standing like statues, spears slanted. More stood on the overlooking stone balconies. A ripple of murmurs ran through the ranks at the appearance of the maidens, but it was quickly stilled in chanted shouts of, "All glory to the Dragon Reborn! All glory to the Lord Dragon and Tyr! All glory to the Lord Dragon and the High Lord Mylan!" From Mylan's expression, you would have thought it all spontaneous. Dark-garbed servants, the first Cairhienan Rand had seen in the palace, rushed out with worked golden bowls and white linen cloths as he swung a leg over the high pommel and slid from his saddle. Others came to take reins. He took the excuse of bathing his face and hands in cool water to leave Aviendha to climb down by herself. Trying to help her down might have ended with them both flat on the paving stones. Unprompted, Sulin chose out 20 maidens besides herself to accompany him within. On the one hand, he was glad she did not want to keep every last spear around him. On the other hand, he wished Nyla, Lamel, and Samara were not among the 20. The considering looks they gave him, especially Lamel, a lean, strong-jawed woman with dark red hair, nearly 20 years older than he, made him grind his teeth while trying to smile reassuringly. Somehow, Avienda must have managed to speak to them and to Sulin behind his back. I may not be able to do anything about the maidens, he thought grimly as he tossed a linen towel back to one. Burn me if there isn't one Aiel woman who will learn how to her card. The other High Lords greeted him at the foot of the broad bridge.
Let's do one last dab.
All in colorful silk coats and satin stripes and silver-worked boots. It was plain that none were aware Mylan had gone to meet him until after the fact. Potato-faced Tom, oddly languid in such a compliment, seemed anxiously listening to the Graham, oiled beard making his head seem even balder, clenched fists the size of small pinheads, and glared at Mylan, even as he bowed to Ram. Simon's sharp nose seemed quivering up. Marakan, with blue eyes, rare in Tyr, compressed his thin lips until they almost disappeared. And while Hearn's narrow face was all smiles, he tugged unconsciously at one earlobe as he did when furious. Only Blade's slender
Cheers.
arm showed no outward emotion, but then he almost always ready to let it burst into flame. It was too good an experience. Silently thanking Moraine for her lessons, it was easier to trip a fool than to knock him down, she said. Rand clasped Torion's pudgy hand warmly and clapped Guayam on the point of a thick shoulder. Returned Hearn's smile with one warm enough for a close companion, and nodded silently to Ericol with a seemingly significant glance. Simon and Marakan he all but ignored after one look as flat and cool as a deep winter pond for each. That was all it needed for the moment, beyond watching their eyes shift and faces tighten in thought. They had played Deus de Mar, the game of houses, their entire lives, being among Pyrianen, who could...
Alright, everyone, probably gonna call into this life for right now. I got 5 days. Always try to make it a good sesh. But I want to thank everyone who stopped by, everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.